I feel a little bit weird with my backs to most of the people, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk around where I can see everybody, and while I do that, I'm going to welcome you to Newport, because you are in a really exciting place. As Janet pointed out, there is some really cool stuff here. If you go right down the road, if you go out of the hotel to the left, down the road you'll get to the Truro Synagogue, which is one of the oldest synagogues, I think the oldest synagogue in the country. It's so old that its warden, the lay head of the congregation, exchanged correspondence with George Washington. So it's been around a long time, and Peter Harrison, the famous colonial architect, designed it, so it's a piece of architectural noteworthiness as well. You continue on down to Colony House, which at one point was the State House, and George Washington spoke there as well. We've been around a while, and we appreciate George Washington came through campaigning, we'll be glad to know, because it was part of his political thing. You can keep on going down and you get to the harbor, and there is a place called Aquidneck Lobster, which has been turned on the base, on the harbor side, into kind of a beer and clams and lobster restaurant joint. But the near side of it still recalls its glory days as the place where the lobsters used to come in. And they've still got the big tanks, and you can still look between the boards down the water below, because it was built right over the water with just one layer of planks. And it's a very cool piece of our history. And then, of course, they're all mansions, because all robber barons love to come here and hang out together in the summer. So you will have a lot to do that is great, and I really join Janet and welcome you to the Ocean State. And I know that Kurt Spalding, our Region 1 Administrator, is here as well. He's also a Rhode Islander. It's the first time we mentioned a Rhode Islander in a Region 1 EPA. He's doing a great job. We're really proud of Kurt. But because this is the Ocean State, I wanted to mention a few things about oceans. As Janet mentioned, if you go on down to the Navy base, there's a tide gauge that NOAA runs at Naval Station Newport. And it's a pretty basic measurement of where the tides go over time. And sure enough, as Janet said, they're up 10 inches since the 1930s. Well, if you're from around here, and you're thinking of the oceans in the 1930s, you're thinking of the hurricane of 1938. And if you're not familiar with the hurricane of 1938, at some point during the day, Google Rhode Island hurricane of 1938 and push images. And then imagine that we were way less developed back then along our coastline. Imagine what that would look like if that happened again, and there were 10 more inches of sea to throw at our shores, 10 plus whatever increment for storm surge that gets added. So when we see the ocean rising like that, we don't have a lot of room to give away. And we don't want our unit of measure to be any smaller than it already is. So we're fighting for some really important stuff. We're fighting on this. The reason, of course, in addition to the draining of the land glaciers, that the ocean is rising is because it's swelling as it warms. The law of thermal expansion is pretty basic stuff, and I don't think anybody quarrels with that. And the ocean gets bigger as it gets warmer. Narragansett Bay is 4 degrees warmer, roughly, 3 to 4 degrees warmer, mean winter water temperature, than it was not too long ago. My wife is a marine scientist. I used to help her do her work when she was doing her research in the field. We used to go out and sample for little shrimp that lives in Narragansett Bay, Crangon septum spinosa. It mattered because it engaged with the larvae of the winter flounder in ways that were important to both species. And the winter flounder at the time was a huge crop in Narragansett Bay. You could cross the bridges that some of you came here over, and you'd look down in the winter and you'd see trawlers out, trawling for winter flounder. The temperature increase has changed the way that the predation works with the little shrimp. The population has crashed by more than 90%, and you simply no longer see a winter flounder fishery any longer. So for the folks who used to supplement their summer incomes by fishing in the winter, this was a big hit. So it really matters to us when we see the oceans rise and when we see the bay and the oceans warming. And of course, you can go to any high school and put CO2 next to seawater in a container, and you can watch the pH of the seawater change, and sure enough, the ocean is acidifying. We're not getting hit as hard yet as what they're seeing in the Northwest. You guys from Oregon and Washington are starting to really see your fisheries clobbered. But like those states, we have a really big aquaculture industry. And you're going to really enjoy some clams and oysters while you're here. And they may come from the ponds, the coastal ponds. They may come from the bay. But they're really good. It's a great industry that's developed. But when they're young, they've got to have an ocean that is conducive to growing that shell. And what you saw in the Northwest was oyster fisheries completely wiped out because it's hard to be an oyster in a world in which you are soluble. And what happens when the ocean gets too acidic is that your shell just degrades. And the salmon fishery in the Northwest is also imperiled by that because of what's happening to the little pteropod, which is a big food of theirs. So we live in this in a really big way, and it's really important to us. So I really thank you for your efforts to help move forward as a country together in this area. This conference is about innovation, and one of the things that to me is the basis of innovation is a free market. And you can't really have an effective free market if things aren't priced right. So I have put forth in the Congress a price on carbon emissions, a carbon fee that will make the adjustment so that the market can react accordingly. It is, by all economic tests, a subsidy when a cost of a product doesn't get put into the price of a product. And it's one of the areas where Republicans and Democrats have a real good chance, I think, of working together, because you see groups like American Enterprise Institute, you see groups like the Niskanen Center, who are here today. I'm so glad they're here. You see groups like Hudson, you see famous economists like Arthur Laffer, who was the guy behind the Laffer curve that Ronald Reagan was his sort of symbolic statement about what taxes do, saying that a carbon fee can't work. And that if you use it to reduce other taxes so there's no net tax increase to Americans, it's a good solution. So I'm hoping that that's a solution we can get to, because it's hard to get to innovation in a market economy when the price of one product doesn't reflect the cost of that product. That's just a market failure. And market failures is something that I hope we can try to get rid of. But until that day comes, we in New England are working with RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. That's been a very good process for us. We pay a little bit more for electricity in order to reimburse the companies for the fee that they pay for their permits to emit. And then the money goes into RGGI, and then it comes back to our states. And we're in a place on conservation and efficiency where we're making more money with the money we get back than we spend. And we're seeing kilowatt hour costs go up. We're seeing consumer bills go down. And at the end of the day, consumers care the amount they write the check for, not what the per kilowatt hour cost is. And Janet and her group have been very, very good about leading that effort and making sure that the money is well spent. Governor Raimondo is an investment banker in her background. She's really a person who looks hard at the numbers, and Marion Gold, who works for her getting this right, is doing a terrific job. So we're seeing that investment pay off for Rhode Islanders big time. And at the local level, that's the best we can do for now. The last thing I want to mention is something on the subject of Rhode Island doing good things. We have a very good coastal management agency, the Coastal Resources Management Council. And when it was presented to them that these guys wanted to build offshore wind off of Block Island to steal in the water that Janet talked about, they moved very quickly. And Cape Wind off of Massachusetts had been out there for a long time already, but the regulatory process for Cape Wind dragged them out so long that they died stretched on that rack. Delaware got ahead of us because vice presidents from Delaware and the Department of Interior put Delaware ahead of us, I assume with a call from the White House, helping out Delaware. But that didn't matter either, because Rhode Island just sailed right by everybody, because our process was so good. We brought everybody into the room. We did all the planning, just the way your states have a GIS system. So you know where the electric lines are buried, you know where the gas lines are buried, you know where the rights of way are, you know what's swamp and what's protected. But we just basically redid that for the waters. And we were able to come up with a footprint where these plants could go, and they're in now. And it was such a good process, actually, the Department of Interior modeled their process on ours and basically adopted it, so we didn't have to do it twice, once for us and once for Interior. So we are in the water, and it shows what a good, smart regulatory process can do to speed somebody right by all their competitors who were not as smart about designing the regulatory process. So I'm very proud of Rhode Island having done that, and we are for the first time actually going to be contributing contributing electrons to the energy grid. We're not a big producer state, as you can imagine. So welcome to Newport. Enjoy your time here. I hope, as Janet said, you get out. We're very proud of this city. We're very proud of our state. And we are at kind of a unique conjunction where a remarkable history and a beautiful environment converge. Please enjoy both. Thank you very much.
We have a few minutes for question and answers, and consistent with practice. If you have a question, just raise your tent placard, and I'll try to see you and recognize you. If you don't see me catch your eye, wave your hand or something. Anybody have any questions for Senator? Thank you.
Going once.
I was just wondering what you thought was going to happen with the TSCA legislation in the Senate.
The questions about the TSCA legislation in the Senate, for those of you who didn't hear, I've got the microphone. It looks pretty good. I think the Senate bill is a good one. It certainly was worked very, very hard, and it's good, I think, right down to the details. The House also passed a bill, and so we have House and Senate both. And what I'm hoping that we'll do is get into conference and start to work out the differences and come up with a bill that everybody can get behind. At the moment, I think we have pretty strong support for the Senate bill. In the Senate, I suspect it would get north of 70 votes. And I don't know how well the House bill would do by comparison. So from with my Senate hat on, I'm hoping that the TSCA bill, as it comes out of conference, looks a lot like the Senate bill, and that we can get a strong bill through and get going.
Any other questions?
State of Washington and a few of my other colleagues would definitely encourage you to make sure to keep an eye on the preemption issues that are coming up with the bill. And so we thank you for your support on that. And then grandfathering in programs that we have innovatively decided to do as states ourselves to protect our citizens and our residents from the harmful effects of toxics in the environment. So we thank you for your support.
Good. We'll stay in touch on that. I think we're actually stronger on the preemption issue than most people think. The things that were provided in the bill that in the preemption area are basically modeled on what the United States Constitution provides. So the Supremacy Clause, you're not going to get around that. The Commerce Clause and the Due Process Clause. If you reduce them to legislative language, that's what we tried to do. And so it really kind of restates what the constitutional limits are without putting any further burden than the Constitution already does on the states as they act to protect their republic.
I know some of us around the room are really interested in this conversation about putting a price on carbon.
Yeah.
And so I applaud you, from Vermont. So we applaud you for really pushing this conversation on the Senate side. Are you aware of similar conversations happening on the House side? And there was a time when there was a consensus between Democrats and Republicans that this would be a sensible way to move forward. That's since fallen apart somewhat. But do you see any glimmers that this could possibly go somewhere?
It's hard to, I'm not on the House side, and I'm not familiar with all the things that are going on over there. My political read is this. There was, as you say, considerable bipartisan activity on climate change. It ended in 2010, which I think is significant because 2010 was the year of the Citizens United decision. And that powered up interest groups in a way that they had never been empowered before. If you were in charge of a big corporation before, you could maybe host a fundraiser for somebody. You could maybe give them a $10,000 PAC check. You were kind of all done. You put their name in your employee newsletters. They would be like this candidate. You were kind of done at that point. This business of spending, $889 million in one election through one group. That just didn't exist. And that's had a very bad effect on the bipartisan conversation. But when you look at where the public polling is, and you look at independent voters, you look at Latino voters, you look at voters under 35, you look at groups that are going to be really important in November of 2016, it's, I mean, game over. So my view is that while the primaries are taking place, people are going to have to do what they're going to have to do to deal with the primary electorate. But whoever the Republican candidate is, before November of 2016, mark my words, they will have had an epiphany. Not necessarily because they want to, but because they have to in order to appeal to those populations. And if we're good about making it an issue, it will force that epiphany. So if you assume that sooner or later the facts of this are going to sink in and people are going to have to react, then the place where people will go is to a carbon fee, because that's where all of the Republican support has been. Former EPA commissioners, former secretaries of the Treasury, former members of Congress, the economists who I mentioned in droves. That's the kind of safe place. And even the Wall Street Journal editorial page, believe it or not, editorialized that they could actually maybe be for a carbon fee as long as it got rid of some other tax. So I can have that conversation, and you know, we can go on from there. It is important that it be revenue neutral, I believe. I think that's important for a whole lot of reasons. So whatever revenue gets raised through the carbon fee has got to go back to the American public, ideally through lower taxes, reduce corporate income tax rates, offsets against payroll tax, things like that. And then I think it becomes saleable. You could even end up with having it be a net tax decrease if you were willing to do that. So there are ways, I think, to make this a palatable solution. And the economics are obvious. I mean, it's somewhere between, well, by one calculation, by the IMF calculation, it's a $700 billion subsidy per year to one industry just in the United States. Come on, you can't. I mean, obviously you'll fight hard for that, but it's hard to justify the merits. All right, well, like I said, welcome to Newport. You will enjoy it. Janet is a great host and a great person, and I appreciate very much that you are here, and I think you'll really enjoy our exciting new governor when she comes to speak to you as well. Thank you and have a wonderful day.